Human history has only been recorded for the last 5,000 years, a fraction of the 80,000 years we've been knocking around on this planet. And in that short space of time, we've packed in a whole lot, from empires rising and falling to space travel and the creation of the internet's busiest monkey cage, YouTube. And in those 5 busy millennia, a strange pattern has started to emerge. Every 100 years, a fatal and infectious event has struck like clockwork. It hit in 1720, 1820, 1920, and the infamous 2020. That just can't be a coincidence, can it? Well, grab your hazmat suits, because we're going to explore some of the most contagious and strangest historical coincidences of all time. Let's start with this creepy, reoccurring pattern. Let's begin in the year 1720, in the French city of Marseille, where locals were suddenly struck down by a grotesque sickness. Pus-filled black boils the size of eggs erupted in their armpits, groins, and necks. These super gross symptoms were accompanied by vomiting and high fevers. What a combo! This is the dreaded bubonic plague, a bacterial infection spread by the bite of the common flea. This particular outbreak would result in the deaths of some 100,000 people in the city and surrounding provinces, earning it the name the Great Plague of Marseille. It was an isolated but deadly event. However, this outbreak was tiny compared to the pandemic that ran rampant through Eurasia just 100 years later. In the year 1820, most of South Asia was infected with cholera. Cholera is a bacterial infection that causes the body to expel large amounts of watery diarrhea. This non-stop pooping can be deadly, as your body loses a huge volume of water. It's spread through dirty water or undercooked food. The colossal death toll of 3.2 million was due to the fact that this pandemic had spread further than any other, originating in Calcutta and reaching as far as China. But even this high death toll was nothing compared to the next pandemic that shook the world. The date, 1920. Are you starting to see the pattern? Creepy, right? The world was only just recovering from World War I when it was hit with one of the deadliest pandemics of all time, the Spanish flu. It infected 500 million people, 1/3 of the global population at the time. This wasn't just a bad case of the sniffles, it was a virus that triggered a cytokine storm in the immune systems of young adults, causing multiple organ failure. The Spanish flu ultimately resulted in a death toll estimated to be between 17 million and 50 million. It was, without a doubt, one of the deadliest pandemics of all time. Now for the last piece of the puzzle. As you probably remember, in 2020, the whole world was hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. Though the virus itself wasn't as deadly as the Spanish flu, it was by far the most transmissible, with a jaw-dropping 655 million cases recorded worldwide. With no immediate vaccine, many governments issued lockdown orders, with citizens forced to stay in their homes with minimal social contact for over a year. And my God, was it dull. I was so bored I watched the entire back catalog of Netflix, even its terrible dating shows. But that wasn't the only disappointment. Given the pattern we've discovered, does this mean the world is due for an even deadlier pandemic in 2120? I mean, it seems the world is destined to suffer from a global pandemic every 100 years. At least that's what article headlines all over the internet would have you believe. But it turns out that this entire concept is a total historical hoax. To break this down, first we need to address what a pandemic actually is. It's a disease that has spread over multiple countries or continents. Therefore, that rules out the Great Plague of Marseille as a pandemic. It was an epidemic contained to France. As for the 1820 cholera outbreak, it actually began in 1817. And the Spanish flu? It began in 1918. And it's not just the date that's wrong, but the name of the pandemic too. Modern scientists have tracked the source of this influenza strain to Fort Riley in Kansas. The disease only became known as Spanish flu because Spanish newspapers were the only ones who freely reporting on the pandemic, since Spain was neutral in the war and had no censorship. It would be more accurate to call it the Kansas flu. Now for the last piece of flimsy evidence, the COVID-19 pandemic. There's no denying this pandemic did force us to stay in our homes in the year 2020. However, the first cases of this previously unknown strain of coronavirus were reported to the World Health Organization on December 31st, 2019. And technically, the COVID-19 pandemic has yet to end, having evolved into different strains like Omicron. This disease has had more comebacks than Madonna. The truth is, pandemic outbreaks are far more random and often caused by unsanitary close contact between animals and humans. So we simply can't predict when the next global pandemic will strike. Now, if this video has successfully made you a total germaphobe, hit that like button. Don't worry, the rest of this video is entirely disease-free, as we'll be diving into even more bizarre historical coincidences. First up, let's talk about the simple word for dog. In 1788, the first British settlers arrived in Australia and soon discovered its dangerous wildlife. But of course, the British weren't the first. Australia had been populated by Aboriginal tribes for centuries with unique languages, or so linguists thought until 1964. It was in this year that Professor Robert Dixon set out to study the language of the Mbabaram tribe in northeastern Australia. During one of his first meetings with a native speaker, he pointed to a dog and asked for the word. To his shock, he got the exact same response, dog. By complete coincidence, the pronunciation of the Mbabaram word is identical to the English version, despite the two cultures being almost 10,000 miles apart. Sometimes the world is just barking mad. Have you ever dealt with a case of mistaken identity? Did you know the chances of someone being your perfect doppelganger is about 1 in 1 trillion? But that's not even as impossible as the odds of what supposedly happened to King Umberto I of Italy. On July 28, 1900, it's claimed that King Umberto went for dinner in the city of Monza. The restaurant owner came out to greet them, but as the king looked up, he thought he was looking into a mirror. The restaurant owner looked exactly like him, and his name was also Umberto. But it gets even spookier. Both men were born on the exact same day in the same city. Both had married women named Margherita, and both had sons named Vittorio. The two men couldn't believe the stunning set of coincidences. Tragically, the very next day, the restaurant owner died after being shot in unexplained circumstances. And in a shocking twist of fate, King Umberto himself was also assassinated in a shooting incident. While it's a great story, I couldn't find a single reputable source that backed this up. It's likely just a historical rumor, and a killer rumor at that. Can you imagine walking down the street when all of a sudden it starts raining money? Now that would be a sweet green miracle. But in the case of Joseph Figlock, the miracle that fell out of the sky gave him more of a fright. The urban legend goes that Joseph was walking down a Detroit street in the 1930s when he caught a falling baby. By some wacky coincidence, 1 year later, he caught the same baby falling from a window again. The story, however, isn't quite so neat. Joseph did, in fact, catch 2 young children falling out of windows, but they were 2 separate kids at different locations, and they didn't so much land in his arms as they landed on him. But why were there so many babies falling out of windows? Well, that was the result of an insane baby cage trend that literally swept the nation. Parents would hang wire cages outside their apartments so their babies could get fresh air. Thankfully, in the 1950s, people finally came to their senses and realized that babies and heights don't mix. Forget the baby boomers, the generation before were baby droppers. Finally, let's talk about Miss Violet Jessop. She was a stewardess who sailed aboard 3 of the White Star Line's most famous ships, the RMS Olympic, the RMS Titanic, and the HMHS Britannic. But you might know these ships better as the one that crashed, the one that famously sank, and the one that was hit by a sea mine. Yes, Violet Jessop was on board all 3 when they were involved in their separate disasters, and she survived them all. She went on to work on cruise ships for the rest of her 42-year career. I'm sure other passengers would get super nervous when they saw her on board. But what if a story could predict a disaster? Before Stephen King, the world's premier horror writer was Edgar Allan Poe. In his novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, a crew of sailors stranded at sea draw straws and eat the one who lost, a character named Richard Parker. But in a stunning coincidence in 1884, over 46 years later, the crew aboard the Mignonette ship found themselves in the same situation. They were stranded in a lifeboat, and they sacrificed their cabin boy, whose name was also Richard Parker. An impossibly creepy coincidence. I sure do hope none of Stephen King's novels predict the future. So, which did you think was the strangest coincidence of all? And do you know of any other weird twists in history? Let me know down in the comments, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing historical stories. See you next time.